We're here in the beautiful, rainy Skagit County in the Skagit Valley with Don McMorran, who is the head of the local extension department in Skagit Valley. We happen to be on the McMorran farm, which is, I understand you're, not only are you the county agent for this county, but you're a fourth generation farming family.
That's correct, Alan.
All right, and tell us a little bit about how many crops are grown in Skagit Valley, and just give us a quick overview of Skagit Ag.
Yeah, so Skagit Ag has over 90 crops of significance, a little over $300 million of production. Right here in our little county, it's 30 miles north to south, and then 100 miles east to west, around 1 million acres total. Farmable, it's around 100,000 acres.
So how many growers are there in Skagit County?
So USDA lists Skagit as 1,350 farmers, but as you think about the larger major producers, we're about 70 growers control about 80 or 90% of the land here. So
when you say control, that means they own or rent it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing about Skagit as well. Most farmers rent way more ground than they own.
Okay, and tell us about the crop that is behind us.
So this is a new crop to Skagit County. This is Brussels sprouts.
And so this is for the fresh market? And
fresh market.
And this is, will this grow for a year and a half?
Yeah, so they just planted in April. They won't harvest this crop until December. And most of these Brussels sprouts will go into Canada. There's a huge market there. Apparently in Canada, they eat a lot of Brussels sprouts in and around Christmas time.
What are some of the pest problems with Brussels sprouts?
It has all those common problems that all the brassicas do, but aphids tends to be the major one for Brussels sprouts.
And these are conventional Brussels sprouts, I can tell by looking at them, which means they control the aphids with just insecticides.
Yeah, so this one's getting regular applications of pesticides, and the grower has tried to do this organically and got very close, but unfortunately just can't get there in organic production.
Because of inability to control the pests organically.
That's correct.
And what do we have going here?
We got some mini pumpkins behind us. They go all over the United States.
One of the things that's a little interesting is this farming operation is run by one of the many women in agriculture that we have in Western Washington. What are the pest problems for this crop?
Well, we don't have really a whole lot of pest problems, but we are very concerned about a new pest in Skagit County. It's called brown marmorated stink bug, and it could be a real problem for pumpkins. We have found it in Skagit County, but it hasn't been a problem of commercial significance yet.
Which of the 90 crops in Skagit Valley are we looking at now?
So we got some barley behind us, and it's used for malting barley, so this will get made into your beer and whiskey.
How much malting barley is there in the Skagit?
Well, with COVID, there's more than ever in history.
Why because of COVID?
Well, a lot of our producers just decided they weren't sure if they could get any labor this year, and they weren't sure about that situation, so they just changed their cropping system and planted a lot more grain because they knew, if nothing else, they could harvest it.
To me, when I think of crops in the Skagit Valley, it's the flowers and the bulb industry that is probably the most well known. They have the Skagit Tulip Festival, and although it doesn't look like it, this is a field of tulips. So Don, what can you tell us is going on here?
Yeah, so they came through and they're topping this field and getting ready for harvest.
And so what do they harvest? They're not harvesting the flowers.
That's right, they're harvesting the bulbs.
So where do the bulbs go?
The bulbs go back to the plant, and they sort them and size them, and then they decide which bulbs they're going to sell to the public and which ones they're going to keep for their own.
And I believe this is Washington Bulb Company.
That's correct.
And it's my understanding that's the largest flower bulb farm in the United States.
That is correct.
And so they do tulips, daffodils, a few irises, is that right?
Yeah, also some peonies.
Oh, and some peonies. And I know that they have some disease problems. And
Yes, there are a lot of fungicides that are applied to these flowers when they're growing.
Okay. I guess this is, it's asexual reproduction, and so just like in the case we'll hear about later about potatoes, whenever you propagate, asexually, the diseases can come along with the seeds, and so disease management's
It's a very important thing and a very important crop for Skagit County.
something else that's interesting in Skagit Valley that is, to me, seems a little different. Talk about growers trading land.
Yeah, and Washington Bulb really sets the example for that. They really focus in on their flower operation, but then they trade with other growers, such as my father who grows spinach seed on their ground.
So they don't rent land, they don't charge for it, they just swap acre for acre?
Yep, so the saying is acre, for better, for worse.
What does that mean?
So you might have an acre of your ground that has a slight depression in it, or something that's not ideal for the other producer, but that's a land swap.
So they figure year in, year out, over time it averages out?
That's correct.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So what percent of this land around here gets traded?
More than a quarter of the ground gets traded, maybe even half of it.
Every year or over time?
Every year.
Really?
Yeah.
Crop rotation.
Crop rotation.
At this stop, we've got two crops. One of the cornerstones of the Skagit Valley crops, and then one of the more esoteric crops. What's this crop that we have behind us, Don?
So this is cabbage, and they make this cabbage into sauerkraut.
So is that done here in the valley?
Right here in the valley.
So there's a sauerkraut factory?
That is
Here?
correct, yeah. Imagine these heads that are, bigger than your head of cabbage going into these great big vats, and then they get sliced up and into these packages and out to people in the United States to put on their hot dogs.
So they're like
Giant, yeah. In fact, the owner of this field brought one into a workshop I did a few years ago, and it was 40 pounds.
I can't imagine that. That's a big head. And the crop behind us?
So of course we've got potatoes. It's a $60 million industry in Skagit County and a cornerstone, like you said.
So that's probably dollar-wise, maybe even acreage-wise, one of the biggest crops.
Yeah, it's been leading commodity in Skagit County for quite a few years now.
All right. How many acres do you have?
Right around 12,000.
Okay, right around 12,000. And I see it's got purple flowers. Can you tell from the flower color what variety it is?
Usually, I mean, if we have kind of a yellow, or excuse me, a purple reddish flower, that's usually a red potato, but it doesn't always work that way.
What I have here is a sequential planting. What's planted right behind us was transplanted relatively recently, and I can identify 4 to 5 different plantings, and I would guess there's probably 80 or so acres of cabbage here. And so they have planted this so they can harvest this over a several week period. Which one of the 90 crops of the Skagit Valley are we looking at now?
We're looking at a broccoli field that's getting disced in.
So they've harvested all they're going to harvest, and they're going to work this in and plant another crop.
That's correct. Probably not until next year though, or maybe this will get planted into grains later in this fall.
All right, let me guess, cabbage maggots a problem here?
Yeah, broccoli can have all the same issues we have with cabbage. It's a brassica, so a lot of the same issues.
So we obviously are outstanding in our field, in this case a bean field. So what's the story on beans in the Skagit Valley, Don?
Yeah, it's kind of a new crop. We lost peas back in 2010, and growers are really searching for alternative crops to be able to rotate on their potato rotations, and stumbled upon beans, and who knew they'd grow well here?
What kind of beans do they have in the valley?
So we have both dry beans and we do green beans for processing.
Where are they processed?
Well, believe it or not, they actually ship them all the way over to Eastern Washington to process them.
So why grow here if you can grow them in Eastern Washington?
You know, it's just one of those crops that we really need. We need that rotation, so it works out really well, and why not?
So you mentioned rotation. What's the importance of rotation in the Skagit Valley?
Right, so most of our potato growers in Skagit County like to have a 4-year rotation on potatoes. So that means they're growing potatoes 1 year and they have to find another crop to grow in the other 3 years.
So this probably breaks up a disease cycle, good for weed control for alternative weeds, and it fixes nitrogen.
Exactly, it's a great crop for Skagit County and we're really glad to have it here.
These beans look beautiful. Looking at it, looks like one of the major pests are weeds, so I assume it's managed through cultivation and herbicides?
Correct. Yep, they'll come through, do a cultivation. This field has had a herbicide application to it, and you can tell it's working.